You might think of witches as campy movie villains with pointy hats and green skin, but for 3 centuries in Scotland, people's lives and deaths hung on the accusation of witchcraft. So here's the story of Scotland's witch trials. As dark fog rolls over the Scottish village of North Berwick, townsfolk begin gathering in the market square. Their faces are lit by flickering torches, casting long shadows that twist and turn like grasping claws. The villagers huddle close together, exchanging nervous glances. Then a sudden gasp ripples through the crowd. A lone figure emerges from the fog, stumbling towards them with outstretched arms. It's Agnes Sampson, a 68-year-old woman. She's gasping for breath, clutching at her chest. Before anyone can help her, she collapses at their feet, dead. An ominous silence falls over the crowd. They didn't know what illness could strike so fast and so unexpectedly. But one thing is for sure, they won't find peace until they find a culprit. Someone is responsible for this tragedy, and in their desperation they'll stop at nothing to find out who. This moment will change their town forever. It was 1590 and the Scottish people were on edge. For decades, Europe had been gripped by what historians call the early modern witch craze, a period between the 14th and 18th centuries when there was an explosion in accusations and persecution of people practicing witchcraft. And Scotland was no exception. But unlike their neighbors, the Scots would take things further. So now back to our story. For centuries, the small town of North Berwick had been just another picturesque Scottish village. That was until Agnes Sampson's mysterious death. With no medical explanation, the townspeople began to panic. Soon, rumors spread like wildfire that Agnes had been the victim of witchcraft. Fear twisted through the community and pointed fingers began to fly. Everyone was suspicious. It didn't help that Scotland was going through a turbulent time. The country was ruled by King James VI, who had come to power when he was only 14 years old. He had a lot on his plate, like uniting 2 kingdoms and dealing with an ongoing feud with Queen Elizabeth I of England. In a way, he needed an escape. In 1597, King James experienced a violent storm while sailing to Denmark to meet with his bride. When the ship almost capsized, the king swore he saw a woman waving a white handkerchief on shore. Believing that she had cursed him, James returned home and started hunting for witches. When he heard tales of a dying woman and an unsettled community, he saw an opportunity. James wanted to restore order to his kingdom, and he believed that punishing witches would do just that. With the backing of the king, the North Berwick witch trials began. Agnes's sister-in-law, a woman named Gillis Duncan, was the first to be accused. The accusers claimed that she had confessed to cursing the king during a meeting with other witches. In a panic, Gillis accused another local woman, Isabella Gowdy. Soon, an entire coven of witches was exposed. The accusations spun out of control. People were accused based on the flimsiest evidence. Some were even accused based on dreams. Those accused were isolated and vulnerable, often elderly women or widows. But no one was safe. In fact, the most common age for those accused was between 20 and 40. By February, more than 70 people had been in prison. At first, the accused were given a trial, but it was more of a formality than anything else. James wanted results. Accusations were enough. Proof wasn't necessary. The judges were instructed to ensure the guilty were convicted. If found guilty, their punishment was predetermined. The accused had no chance of defending themselves. They couldn't speak on their own behalf. They weren't allowed to question witnesses or cross-examine accusers. Most didn't even know what they were accused of until they were already in court. Of course, there was one way to avoid punishment: confess. And some of the accused did just that. They confessed to horrible crimes, saying that they had been part of secret gatherings where they performed dark rituals, invoked the devil, and practiced all kinds of evil. Confessors were rewarded with lighter sentences, while it seems that the punishments for those who didn't confess were much worse. That was impossible because they all confessed. In fact, there were no records of anyone refusing to plead guilty ever being put to death. But how were these confessions extracted? Many of those accused were tortured. The accused were stripped naked and forced to endure excruciating pain. They were suspended by ropes from rafters. Their limbs dangled above the floor, or they were pressed with weights to force them to confess. As onlookers watched intently, the accused were broken. Sometimes they were left in this state for weeks until they finally confessed to whatever their accusers wanted them to admit. Once convinced of their guilt, the townspeople felt justified in their suspicions. If the accused confessed to such heinous crimes, then they must have been guilty. But now it was time to move on to the next step. The accused witches were led to the center of town where they were burned at the stake. Witnesses watched intently as the flames enveloped their victims. Some were burned alive, but others survived. If the accused still refused to recant their heresy, the fire was used as a form of torture rather than capital punishment. Once they were badly burned, the flames were extinguished and they were strangled with a rope. Although burned alive, few actually died from their wounds. Strangulation was a quick and efficient method of ending their suffering. The rest of their body might have been engulfed in flames, but it was the strangulation that ended their lives. Following this brutal public spectacle, the bodies were left to rot in the square, sometimes left for days or even weeks before they were buried. And although this was happening in the 1500s, it wasn't unique to North. Across Scotland, similar scenes were playing out. People were being accused, tortured, and killed for the crime of witchcraft. Over the course of 300 years, around 3,000 to 4,000 people were accused of witchcraft in Scotland, and of those, hundreds were executed. At the peak of the witch craze in the early 1600s, Scotland was killing people for witchcraft at a higher rate than any other country in Europe. Men and women were persecuted equally, but historians believe that the majority of those targeted were female, mostly poor, uneducated women living alone or widowed. Why? Well, it seems that the real target wasn't witchcraft. It was women. Many of the accused were midwives or healers, women whose knowledge and skills were viewed suspiciously by the men in power. For centuries, women had been blamed for everything from storms to illness. So when something bad happened, they were easy. It's not surprising that many of the accused were also older women. Back then, old age came with a great deal of prejudice, and for a woman alone in the world, life was difficult. The oldest and most vulnerable in society were an easy target. If this sounds like a black mark in Scottish history, you're not wrong. But the reality is that these events were normal for the time period. They weren't special to Scotland. Witchcraft accusations, torture and killings were taking place across Europe. But Scotland was different. They took it further. Today, people around the world continue to debate why Scotland became obsessed with witchcraft. Perhaps it was the landscape. Remote villages were cut off from the rest of the world. Superstitions and folklore thrived in these places. Maybe it was religion. Scotland was the birthplace of Presbyterianism, a strict form of Protestantism. Superstition and witchcraft were seen as serious sins. Or perhaps it was just a way to gain power. Blaming someone for misfortune was a great way to punish the powerless. Whatever the reason, it's clear that the Scottish people lost sight of reason. Accusations of witchcraft were made easily, accepted quickly, and punished severely. No wonder people were terrified. So, with such a dark chapter in their history, what has Scotland done to remember those who suffered? Only recently has Scotland begun to confront its past. In 2022, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a formal apology to all accused witches. She admitted that they had been denied justice and called them victims of an abusive and oppressive system. Some activists want pardons and monuments to honor the memory of those killed, but many believe that simply acknowledging their stories is the greatest tribute. These weren't myths. These were real people whose lives were cut short by fear and suspicion. We may live in a different time, but are we really so different from the superstitious villagers of Northborough? Today, people are still killed for witchcraft in parts of Africa and Asia and across the world. Women are still persecuted for their knowledge and independence. If we don't remember these tragedies, we risk repeating them. Now check out 8 insane ways people tried to cure mental illness in the past. Or watch insane criminal trials that ended up being a total farce.